Welcome to the Health Detective Podcast. I'm your host, Tiaan, and I'm here with Susan Birch, the Health Detective. This is the third episode in the Health Made Simple series, where Susan and I will talk about various topics to help you find simple steps to improve your health. Hey, Susan. Good to see you again.
Yeah, hey, Tiaan. Always lovely to see you.
So today, the hot topic for today is intermittent fasting.
Yeah, it's a good one, isn't it?
Yeah, and it seems everybody is talking about it, but there's a reason we have this conversation today, and I think there's a couple of things that you would like to impart to your audience. So what is kind of the key things that you would like to talk to us about today about intermittent fasting?
Well, intermittent fasting's become really popular. Everyone's talking about it. All the influencers out there are writing books about it. And I think it's an excellent modality to include as part of, taking care of our health. But it can also turn into a fad. And yeah, so I'd just like to help clear up, ways of doing it, what the science shows versus what extrapolating the science to mean says, and just help people find ways of personalizing it so that it will work better for them.
That sounds fantastic. I guess let's dig into it. I mean, what is intermittent fasting, and where does it come from, and why is it so popular at this point?
Well, fasting is just a deliberate practice of abstaining from food or beverages for a specific period of time. And, it's been around for centuries. It's been a spiritual practice. Ramadan practices it during Lent. It's used, and it's a way of reflecting on ourselves and life, cleansing our body and, improving our body function. And also it's a way of having some self-discipline in what we do. And, in more recent years, it's gained popularity for its health benefits, but mostly for weight loss because, all the different weight loss strategies out there, they become popular and then they sort of work and then they don't work anymore. And so people are always looking for something new to try.
It's an interesting perspective about kind of the self-reflection and getting some discipline in one's life as well. But if we're focusing on the weight loss and the health benefits or the health impact that it has on us, are there any scientific studies that support us, or what does the science say about intermittent fasting?
Well, probably the best science has come from Sachin Pandra in his lab at the Salk Institute, and he's probably set up the scientific community for looking at intermittent fasting, and that's where we've learned so much from. A lot of the science is based in animal models, and then when it's based in human models, it's really difficult, real difficult subject to study because humans aren't the same as mice in cages that get fed by exactly the same thing by other humans at exactly the same time. So, we have all these variables when we're studying human beings. But his lab, they've set up an app, and I'll put the link to the app in the show notes because the app is called My Circadian Clock, and that gives people a chance to log in and then follow through the process. And you sort of spend the first 2 weeks setting up, establishing your baseline, and then you start going into your different styles of intermittent fasting. And that's where you're going to get really good, accurate information as well. So I would highly recommend anyone interested actually log in and try that. And you take a photo of your food each time you eat. So you just take a photo and you just log it into the app. Yeah.
Well, that sounds great.
There are a lot of studies now, though. I had a look before our podcast today, and since 2022, so since last year, there's been 300 studies registered looking at intermittent fasting. So it's definitely a very hot topic in science at the moment.
That sounds interesting. And we're going to get to the circadian side of things. So But just on a high level, is there then a big correlation between your circadian rhythm and the idea of fasting?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have these things in our body called circadian clocks, and all of our organs, we all, have different circadian clocks. And, before we push record, we were talking about cortisol, and you were talking about, weight training and cortisol going up in the morning, and is that the best time? And so, all those kinds of things are part of our circadian clocks. We've talked before, I think, one of the other podcasts about our migrating motor complex, after we eat, how long we need for the food to be able to be moved through our body. We talked about the lymphatic system, the sort of street cleaners coming in and cleaning our brain when we go to sleep. So those are all part of our circadian clock, our circadian rhythms. And of course, we have 24-hour ones. Women have monthly cycles, we have seasonal cycles, and a whole lot of it is connected with light and dark and light exposure, and this, see if I can pronounce it, suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN in our brain, which kind of regulates all those things.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about the weight loss aspect, because it seems like this is the thing that draws people closer to intermittent fasting to begin with. So, how does it help with weight loss?
Well, one of the problems with gaining weight is we have to have two things present. We've got to have the energy and hormones. Okay, so if you think back to our first podcast, and we were talking about type 2 diabetes, but if we think about type 1 diabetics who aren't controlled, who aren't taking on board insulin, they eat and eat and eat, and they don't gain weight. Okay, so it doesn't matter how many calories or how much energy they have in their body, they don't gain weight. So we've got to have energy input plus hormones to make us gain weight. So one of the best things about intermittent fasting, and this is where people like Jason Fung and I've forgotten his name off the top of my head, but some of his colleagues use it because they deal with really morbidly obese people, extreme type 2 diabetics, and they're able to help get them off their medication and start to restore their health through using intermittent fasting and extended fasting. And they do that by controlling the hormones. So what happens, when we're fasting, we're not eating. And our insulin, if we avoid eating for long enough, our insulin starts to go down. And when our insulin goes down, then we can release other hormones that allow us to access our body fat and start using our body fat for calories rather than putting the calories in our mouth as food. So that's one of the main ways that it helps. So, we deplete our glycogen stores, our glucose stores in our body. We shift into this fat burning stage. We go into ketosis, which is a normal, healthy process that we should go in every night when we're asleep. We should go into ketosis, improve our insulin sensitivity, and then change the release of all those other hunger hormones, fat releasing hormones.
Right. So this sounds, when I first heard about intermittent fasting, it sounded a lot like a crash diet. How is this different from a crash diet?
I guess it depends what you term a crash diet. I mean, people go on very low calorie diets to lose weight, and they work for a while and then they stop. This is where the research is really interesting, and Sachin Panda's research is fascinating, because we know that calorie restriction helps with aging. That's been with longevity. So that's been proved in the research over many years. And so the questions that are raised for the researchers are, is it the calorie restriction part of the fasting or the intermittent fasting that's the benefit, or is it the fasting itself? And so those are the questions that need to be teased out, and we need to figure out the answers. But obviously, if you're not eating for a period of time, you are naturally restricting calories somewhat, but then you are also changing that hormonal profile in your body as well.
So reflecting back on some of the other episodes that we've done, and we've talked about, it's not necessarily about the calories, but about the nutritional value you get in your food. So it's the difference then here that you're not going to eat necessarily, you're not necessarily going to eat less. You're just going to eat less times during the day, but you should still get a certain amount of nutrients and a certain amount of calories in your diet. It's not like you're depriving yourself of those.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's really important. One of the things that does seem to happen is that as people start to switch into fat burning mode, they don't tend to need to eat as many calories, so they don't get as hungry. And that's what people find when they go on ketogenic or carnivore diets, is they're not so hungry because they're not triggering that whole insulin up and down and those glucose spikes. And when we eat glucose, it kind of drives us to want to eat more glucose or more sugar. So that's part of it. And I think I've just about forgotten what the rest of the question was. It was about the nutrients, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So nutrients are absolutely essential. And one of the problems, that we talked about in earlier episodes is that we eat more and more energy, more and more calories to get the nutrients. So if we're not eating high quality calories, well, then we'll eat more and more in order to get the nutrients. When we've got a limited period of time to eat, you sort of get full and then you stop eating. And that's one of the tricky things about this whole intermittent fasting process, is because a lot of people feel that, if they do say, don't eat for 16 hours and then eat for 8 hours, they can eat whatever they like in those 8 hours. And at first that sort of works, but then over time it stops working because of, the lack of nutrients that you're getting into your body.
Right. So when we're talking about the glucose levels and things, I think the obvious inference to make there is that it affects our energy levels and by extension our focus. But can you elaborate on how does it actually improve energy levels and focus, or if it improves at all?
That's the intermittent fasting.
Yeah.
Well, it does, it does quite a few things. And it depends on how long you do it. And this is where the science is still trying to tease out the answers to all these things. And, you see all sorts of stuff on the internet about do it like this and do it like that. But I don't know that the answers are 100% clear yet. But it does improve a thing called autophagy, or autophagy, depending what country you live in. And that helps break down old sort of damaged cells in our body and break them down and get rid of the damaged bits and recycle the useful bits, to be reused. It's, a bit like a car wreckage yard or something like that, throw away the rubbish and reuse the other components that are still good. It also is involved in mitophagy, which is doing the same thing to our mitochondria, so that we clean up our mitochondria and improve the quality of our mitochondria and their ability to function. And then it does have these hormonal changes as well. So all those things contribute to improving our energy and our focus. But then the other part that I don't think gets talked about enough is what happens to our cortisol and adrenaline and, epinephrine and norepinephrine, because whenever we are under stress, we increase those levels. Now, intermittent fasting during the day, and we can talk about, all the different protocols out there, isn't going to do too much harm or damage to those systems, you know. It's good to have a bit of stress in our body. It's actually healthy. It makes us better and stronger. But when people start getting into really extended periods of intermittent fasting, 72 hours, 76 hours, 10 days, our body, first of all, our body doesn't know whether that we've chosen to do it or whether we're starving. So those are two things to keep in mind. And then that stress is going to increase all those adrenal hormones, because our ancestors obviously would have had periods of time where they didn't have access to food. And when you don't have access to food, the last thing you want to do is go away and hide in your cave and not go searching and looking for food. So we have this mechanism in us where we get up and go out and start hunting and gathering and finding something to eat. So that's going to trigger that cortisol and adrenaline, and that makes us feel good. We feel hyper, we feel really awake, and we feel really alive. And, and so many people tell me how amazing they feel when they do fasting, especially extended day fasting. So that's a benefit. But then there comes a point, like, where does it go from being healthy to being starvation, and when is it going to be a problem? And those are the questions that we need to get teased out in science. And also it's going to be really individually dependent. Your age, are you a young fit man who's doing CrossFit or bodybuilding, or are you older woman who's trying to preserve her muscle mass and keep her brain function going? So all those things require a really personalized approach.
So on that though, I've heard many times people say things, and it's completely unsubstantiated. It's like urban legends. If you don't eat, your body would start holding back fat because it thinks you're starving and things like that. Is there actually any truth to that? So if you have extended periods of fasting, that you're actually countering the weight loss benefits, say, that you would have wanted from it?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's like that whole metabolism issue is quite complex. As you reduce weight, so as you lose weight, your body needs less calories anyway. So that's going to mean a reduction in metabolism in one sense. Ideally, we want to be able to eat as much food, good quality food, as we can without gaining weight or by being able to maintain our weight. The metabolism question is one of the ones that's in the research at the moment looking to be answered. I think for a few days for short-term fasting, that can be, I'm not convinced that that's necessarily true. I think our body can cope with that. The research I've seen has, though, been done in, sort of young 20, 30-year-old men, fit bodybuilding. So again, it's hard to extrapolate it out to, say, a sedentary woman who's in her 60s, say, or, who's not doing any exercise. So there's so many sort of qualifiers to that. I think we have to be careful about our muscle. The short term, so what's called intermittent fasting or time restricted eating, which occurs over a day. So, typically, like, people have probably heard of 16-8 or 18-6. So you don't eat for 16 hours and then you pack all your food into 8 hours. That's showing no detriment to muscle mass. In fact, it's showing improvements in maintaining muscle mass, but we just need more evidence for longer term fasts. And one of the concerns I have often is that people get so focused on the weight loss, they forget about the quality of the weight loss. So we want to lose fat, but we don't want to lose lean body mass. So it's really important to sort of balance those things out.
So this, in a way, to me, sounds like we're going back to having that higher protein diet, is to supplement our diet when we do eat. with higher protein to make sure we don't lose the muscle mass.
Yeah, I think, always making sure we prioritize protein in our diet, prioritize protein, control your carbohydrates within your personal carbohydrate threshold, and eat really good quality fat. So that just the three basic principles that we need to attend to. So we've got to get that protein in. Again, if you look at studies which are done in young men, say, for example, and then they get extrapolated out to older people, you can't do that because they have testosterone and growth hormone and all these other things that enable them to maintain their muscle mass. And then, if you're looking at in a group of 50 plus women, we just don't have those hormones available. So we've got to really be careful about what we're eating and when we're eating and how we're eating.
Can we dig into that a little bit? I mean, does it matter how you fast? It seems there's many different ways of approaching this, and you alluded to different time frames that you should consider and things like that. But does it matter? What kind of?
It does. Apparently, it does. It seems to matter. All the circadian clock information is really relevant to it. So it appears that we should be trying to consume our calories during daylight hours. So we don't want to be eating too late at night. We don't want to be eating, within 2 or 3 hours of going to bed. So if you're going to do, say, let's use 16-8 as you're not going to eat for 16 hours and you have an 8-hour eating window. So then you need to figure out what's the latest time you're going to eat at night and work backwards from that. Now, there is some evidence that getting protein into you sort of before 10 o'clock in the morning can be really valuable as well. For maintaining muscle mass, and that if you can get that protein in the morning, that really helps throughout the day with maintaining muscle mass. The other thing is that the time we've got to digest the food after our last meal as well. So our intermittent fasting doesn't really start until we have actually completed that digestion process as well. So people will go, okay, well, I'm going to eat from 10 to 8, and that gives me 8 hours. No, what am I saying? I'm not going to eat from 8 at night till 10 in the morning. That gives me my 16 hours fasting. Yeah, same thing. Does it? I'm not sure if I've worked that out properly. Anyway, but you've got to remember that you've got that digestion period. It's probably 10 to 6 actually, but you've got to remember you've got that digestion period to take into account as well. So you might think you're doing 16 hours fasting, but you're actually only doing, 14 hours.
Right. And generally that digestive process is 2 hours, 4 hours?
Yeah, it depends what you eat, of course, and it depends what form the food takes. It depends how much you eat. So, but yeah, I always think you want to allow 2 to 3 hours at least, and everybody's different.
Right. It's quite interesting that you mentioned that it should be during daylight hours to consume. It's something I've never considered before. It's quite interesting. So,
well, I was just one more thing about that, because the recommendations coming out of the research is that you want to wait for at least an hour after waking up before you put any calories in your body as well. So that can be quite a good bit of information. Yeah.
So you mentioned before as well, not just the food, but also the beverages. So of course that excludes sugary drinks and things like that. But what can we drink? Is coffee okay? Black coffee or tea
during the fasting time?
Yeah.
Yeah, generally caloric drinks. So, black coffee, black tea. So lots of people will get up in the morning and do black coffee or black tea. And this is where it comes to all the different types of fasting. Some people will do some cream or some butter, or, they'll do their bulletproof coffee or put some cream in their coffee or their tea in the morning. And then that's where all the different influencers have different ideas. So, so long as it's less than 50 calories, or so long as it's under this or under that. Liquid calories are easier to digest, for a start. So that does help. But ideally, intermittent fasting would be water and electrolytes would be sort of the pure way of doing it. And you want to do that, in my opinion, you want to do that for at least 12 hours every day, regardless of whether then in the morning you decide to have a black coffee or black tea or put a bit of cream in it.
And when you say electrolytes, what are some of the electrolytes we can consume?
Magnesium, potassium, and sodium. Yeah, and they're really important. And hydration is important. And there's a new technique in fasting out there that's becoming really popular, and has come out of secret Russian kind of, sorry, I'm not really laughing. I think that there would be some benefits, and people that practice it, point to Ramadan, for example, because they dry fast during the day. But one of the problems with it is that you end up with people getting into extremes, and we have a whole lot of people out there exploring longevity options, and they're a different kettle of fish, and they'll do all sorts of things to experiment on themselves. But being hydrated, I think, is really important, especially if you're beginning fasting. And being able to do 12 hours overnight where, the only thing you drink is water, I think is a really good first step for people.
And so these electrolytes, is that just a multivitamin that you can get at the pharmacy, or is there something
you can
else?
buy electrolyte mixes. There's a really good one that comes out of the US, LMNT, I think it's called. And there's other companies that have electrolyte mixes. I use one that doesn't taste nice and sweet like those ones. I just use some drops from a place in New Zealand called Biotest. So if anybody wants any information, they can email me or get in touch. And you can just put a few drops in your water. Those drops don't taste that nice, where some of the other electrolytes do taste really good, so they make you want to keep drinking. But making sure you've got enough electrolytes is really important. Yeah.
Okay. So you've mentioned a couple of things with not being hydrated, for example, and etc. But what are some of the other health risks to intermittent fasting that we should be aware of?
Health risks. Well, dehydration is one of them. Overdoing it and going into starvation mode is, of course, another one. Another health risk is not eating a high quality diet during your feeding window. So I've seen this with, many clients years ago when I had my gym clients, the 5-2 fast. So you eat whatever you want for 5 days, and then you eat sort of below 500 calories for the other 2 days. Was really popular. And clients got frustrated with it because what they thought was, well, I'm not eating for 2 days, so that means I can eat all the junk processed food that I like on those other days, because the calories will then balance out. And the risk of that, of course, is, you're not getting enough nutrients, you're not getting enough protein, you're still really stimulating that insulin, you're not retraining all those hormones and all those appetite hormones and things like that. So I just think it all needs to come together with a really good quality base diet to start off with. And one of the ways it's often sold is, eat whatever you like and then intermittently fast and you'll lose weight or maintain weight. And I think that's a little bit short-sighted, and we don't really know yet long-term what the outcomes of those are going to be for people.
So what I'm picking up from that as well is that if we're not careful with maintaining the right balance, we would stop seeing the results that we wanted to see or to experience from the fasting exercise.
Yeah, I mean that's quite common. You know, it stops working, and it's the same with and that's the problem with all the diets. And one of the things that people don't realize is that when we lose weight, often the first amount of weight we lose is water weight. You know, when we stop eating carbohydrates, we lose a lot of water weight because carbohydrates store water sort of gram for gram in our body. So you stop eating carbs, you're not storing all that water. So that's one of the things. And so that's going to be the initial effect of intermittent fasting, is you're going to lose a lot of water weight during that time that you're not eating. And then, sorry, I've forgotten what the question was.
Are we going to see stalls?
Oh,
are we going
weight
to
loss
miss out
stall.
on the
Yeah. Yeah. And then, of course, it depends how much energy you've got coming in. So again, you know, when we look at keto diets, we see people do really well initially. They lose quite a lot of weight and then they start to stabilize. And often that's because they haven't reduced their fat intake to match the lesser calories that they need. So they're still like eating lots of fat bombs and things like that. And so then their weight loss stalls and then they get frustrated. And it's the same with this. It still always has to come back to how much energy you've got coming in and what your hormones are doing with that energy.
So when we've gone into a fast, say a nice long 16-hour fast, and we want to break that fast, can we just eat anything we want? Or is there a better way to choose the food that we eat that's maybe a little bit more or easier digestible or anything of the like?
So if you're doing a time restricted eatings, which is what we call, you know, like a 16-8 or those other, you know, fasts over the period of a day, you know, I think you need to break your fast with protein. So I think you need to just think of it as a normal, you know, normal eating pattern. You can eat 2 times or 3 times during that eating pattern. I like people to have 4 hours between meals. So if you want to do, you know, if you want to do 3 meals, well then, you know, you need to have 4 hours between each of those meals. Otherwise you can just do 2 meals a day. People find they fall into their own rhythm, but you want to break it with protein. So you need to make sure you get that protein. So you need to go back to, you know, prioritize protein, control carbs, good functional fats, is what you should be breaking it with. Now, if you're doing longer, more extended fasts, not so much even 24 or 48-hour fasts, but when you start getting to some of the longer fasts that people do, and you might do it, you know, once a year, you might do a 7-day fast, or sometimes people will do a 10-day fast once a year. When you break those fasts, you want to be doing it probably with, you've got to be quite careful how you break them, maybe some bone broth, you know, maybe, you know, just to sort of get your stomach used to eating again. You don't really want to push your blood sugars up really high really quickly, because you've been, you know, your insulin's got very low and your blood sugars are being maintained by gluconeogenesis. So when you're doing those fasts, we're breaking down muscle to create the amino acids that we need for our bodies to function. And, you know, there is some research showing that autophagy will break down some of those amino acids as well. So in that study that I was talking about, you know, with the young bodybuilding men, they found that, you know, leucine that we spoke about a few weeks ago, leucine will actually increase in them due to autophagy, due to breaking down all those cellular components while they're fasting, so they're still able to maintain muscle mass. But, you know, again, it just depends on individuals. So breaking your fast, you just need to be careful. And, for probably most of the people listening to this, they'd be thinking about starting at least with time restricted eating. And so you just want to make sure prioritize that protein at every meal.
Great stuff. And I think you've given some good advice there. Actually, for the next question is that if you've never done this before, how do we get going? How do we start?
So I would start by just start by when you eat your breakfast. So prolong your breakfast for an hour, 45 minutes to an hour in the morning. We have this hormone called ghrelin, which is a hunger hormone, and that is part of that whole circadian clock thing that we have going on as well. So when we eat at set times every day, ghrelin will be produced, and our tummy will rumble and our brain will say we're hungry. So we want to just push it out a little bit at a time. So start by just pushing out your breakfast, and then once you've got that pushed out a little bit, then start by eating a little bit earlier in the evening if you can. So try and bring those hours in so that you're slowly reducing the time from either end. Now, I recommend to everybody that everyone tries and at least do 12 intermittent fasting. I think that should just be a natural way that we eat. So we want to, if you have your last bite of food or drink at 10 o'clock at night, well, then don't have anything more with calories in it until 10 o'clock in the morning, or, 8 o'clock at night till 8 o'clock in the morning. So that would be the bare minimum. And that's a great place to start. And that has so many other health benefits for us, even just not about the weight loss. So we've got that improved insulin sensitivity, we've got that autophagy going on, but, there's evidence that it's probably going to improve our heart health. And there's a lot of studies ongoing about looking at cancer prevention. Definitely a lot of research talking about how it improves our gut health by giving, our digestive system that good break, reduces inflammation in our body. And, it influences gene expression. So that's another benefit of, time restricted eating. And, and then of course we've got that hormone regulation that we talked about. So there's so many benefits, and, we'll learn more as the research figures out the exact times to do these things. It's quite interesting. It's quite a funny story because the 16-8, everyone thinks it's kind of really scientifically been worked out. The reason it ended up being 16-8 was due to mouse studies. And the guy that was working in the lab that was responsible for feeding the mice, his girlfriend said he wasn't allowed to work any longer hours. So it ended up feeding these mice being at work for this 8-hour period. And, and so this has taken on these amazing sort of connotations as being the scientific method. And that's, that's the story about how that came about. So I think it's quite funny.
It works for me. 16, it's fine.
Yeah.
The science.
Yeah, it does seem to work. And it seems to be a fairly reasonable one that most people can get themselves into doing. Yeah.
Susan, this has been a fascinating conversation. I think let's just do a quick summary. Let's see if let me do a summary, and then you keep me on the straight and narrow if I'm missing anything. So you mentioned at the beginning that fasting, the intermittent fasting, is not just for the physical health benefits, but it's also a bit of a mental health benefit, and then we can reflect and apply some discipline and some good mindsets there. It's interesting that the weight gain that we have is a combination of not just the calorie intake, but also our hormonal health, and that the intermittent fasting helps us to control kind of both, which kind of makes it different from a crash diet where it's mostly around calorie restriction. The other benefit of doing this is that there's all kinds of what did you call them? Chimney cleaners or all these processes.
Chimney sweeps, yeah.
That kicks in to work out bacteria or unwanted organisms in the body, kind of work it out. It's key to stay hydrated and having some electrolytes that you consume during the day just to kind of keep you going. And it's important still to have a very high quality diet when we are in our feeding window, just to make sure that we can actually get the benefit from the intermittent fasting. And when we break our fast, preferably do that with protein. And obviously, the one that, again, coming back to that, is try to eat during daylight time when the sun is out.
Yeah, I think that's quite important. So, yeah, that was a great summary. And we didn't really dive into the extended fasting all that much, but we can do that at some other time. I thought that was a great summary. Thank you, Tiaan.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Susan. And thank you for joining us today. We'd like to hear from you, so please drop your question in the comment section and we can discuss them in the future episode. Also, please like, subscribe, and share this episode with anyone that might find it helpful. The Health Detective can also be found on Facebook, LinkedIn, and all major podcast services. We're looking forward to seeing you in the next episode, where we'll have an in-depth conversation about cholesterol. See you on the next episode.
Thank you.